The chamber was silent, filled with the faint hum of alien machines and the heavy presence of guards who stood like statues. The human sat at a long table, heart beating fast, every instinct telling them to stay quiet, to stay small, to not draw attention. Across the room stood the alien warlord, a figure of power and fear, his tall form wrapped in dark armor that gleamed under the cold lights. His eyes glowed faintly, not with warmth but with the sharp awareness of a predator. The human had heard stories about him. Entire fleets had fallen at his command. Worlds had surrendered without a fight just at the mention of his name. He was not known for mercy. He was known for strength, for silence, for iron will, and now somehow the human was sitting in his presence alone, caught after a failed attempt at negotiation. It had been a mission of peace, or so it was supposed to be, but peace had never been part of his plans. The human swallowed hard. Words felt dangerous here, yet silence felt worse. The warlord's eyes studied them, sharp and patient like a hunter waiting for movement. Pressure weighed down on the human, and in that crushing silence, fear twisted into something reckless. Without thinking, without planning, the human let out a nervous laugh and said, "You'd make a cute wife." The word slipped into the air like a spark in dry grass. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The guard stiffened. The silence thickened. The human's stomach dropped, realizing the mistake. A joke. It had only been a joke, a desperate attempt to break tension. But in front of this alien leader, it might as well have been an insult. The warlord did not strike. He did not order the guards to move. Instead, something stranger happened. His lips curved slowly, the movement deliberate, controlled. He smiled. It was not the warm smile of a friend or ally. It was sharp, unsettling, as if he had discovered something unexpected. His hand moved to the door control. The lock clicked shut, sealing the chamber. The human froze. Panic spread through their veins. This was it. This was how it ended. A single foolish joke had sealed their fate. But instead of anger, the warlord stepped closer, his voice deep and steady as he said, "Cute wife?" The words sounded strange in his mouth, as though he was testing them, tasting their shape. The human forced another weak laugh. "It's a joke. Humans make jokes when we're nervous. It doesn't mean anything." The warlord tilted his head, eyes narrowing, not in fury but in thought. "You speak lightly in the face of danger. You mock death with laughter." He circled the table slowly, his gaze never leaving the human. "Why?" The human gripped the edge of the chair, searching for words. "Because if we don't laugh, we break. Fear eats us alive, jokes. They keep us standing." The warlord stopped behind the human, silent for a long moment. The tension was unbearable, every muscle tight, waiting for a strike that never came. Then the sound came, low, rumbling, strange. It was a laugh. His laugh. It was rough, unused, as if the muscles themselves had forgotten how to form it. The guards exchanged shocked glances, but none dared speak. The human turned slightly, surprised to hear the sound. The warlord was smiling wider now, though the smile still carried danger in its edges. "Interesting," he said softly. "No one dares jest with me, yet you, a fragile creature of earth, dares speak of marriage to me?" "It was just nerves," the human insisted, though their voice shook. "I wasn't serious." The warlord leaned closer, his presence filling the space. Perhaps you reveal more than you admit." His eyes glowed brighter for a moment, studying every twitch, every breath. Then he stepped back, straightened, and returned to his seat. The human exhaled slowly, realizing they had not taken a full breath since the joke slipped out. Their hands were trembling, but they forced them still. The warlord's reaction was confusing, terrifying, and somehow promising. There was no punishment. There was curiosity instead, and that was a danger all its own. Minutes passed in silence, yet the atmosphere had changed. The warlord no longer looked at the human as if they were prey. He looked at them as if they were something new, something worth keeping alive. His fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, steady, thoughtful. "You are either a fool," he said at last, "or you are brave. Perhaps both. I will find out which." The human nodded quickly, unsure what response was safe. Inside, their thoughts raced. The joke had not killed them. It had done something stranger, something unexpected. And now, locked in this chamber with a warlord who had smiled for the first time in years, the human realized they had stepped into a story far larger than themselves, a story that had only just begun. The chamber remained quiet long after the human spoke. The warlord leaned back in his chair, the faint smile still lingering on his face. It was not a smile that offered comfort. It was one that suggested calculation, as though he had just found a puzzle worth solving. The guards still stood at their posts, their sharp eyes flicking toward their leader, waiting for orders that never came. The human's palms were damp against the surface of the table. Every second stretched long, heavy with tension. They had expected to be dragged out, punished, maybe even executed for their careless joke. Instead, the warlord had smiled. Instead of death, there was curiosity. That was almost worse because curiosity meant interest, and interest meant the human was not free to leave. At last, the warlord spoke, his deep voice steady, almost slow. "Explain this humor of yours. You said it comes from fear." The human licked their lips nervously. "It's complicated. We use laughter when things are too heavy, too dark. Sometimes it makes danger feel smaller. Sometimes it helps us survive the moment." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "So you laugh to lie to yourselves." The human hesitated, then shook their head. "Not exactly. We laugh because fear tries to control us. If we laugh, it doesn't win." Silence followed again, but this time it was not crushing. It was thoughtful. The warlord drummed his armored fingers against the armrest of his chair, the sound echoing softly. He had heard the screams of enemies, the cries of conquered worlds, but laughter. Laughter in the face of death was something new. "Strange," he murmured at last. "My people do not laugh in war. We conquer with silence and strength. We crush until nothing resists. But you mock even me, and still you live." The human gave a weak smile. "I'm not mocking, I just can't stay quiet forever." For a brief moment, the warlord's eyes softened, though the sharpness never fully faded. He rose from his chair, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the human. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a predator deciding whether to strike. The guards tensed as he approached, but the warlord lifted a hand and they froze, obeying without question. He stopped a few steps from the human and studied them closely. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. The human nodded quickly. "Yes, everyone knows. You're the warlord who breaks fleets. You don't lose." "And yet," the warlord said, his voice almost amused, "you sit here, fragile and unarmed, and you tell me I would make a cute wife." The human wanted to disappear into the floor. "I told you. It was just nerves." "Perhaps." The warlord's gaze stayed locked on theirs. "Or perhaps it is courage dressed as foolishness." The human swallowed, unsure how to respond. His words carried weight, but they were impossible to read. The warlord finally stepped back and turned toward the guards. "Leave us." The guards hesitated, exchanging looks of disbelief. To be left alone with a human was beneath their leader's dignity. But his command was absolute. One by one, they bowed and left, the heavy doors closing behind them. The chamber was quieter now, only the faint hum of the machines filling the air. The human shifted uncomfortably in their chair. "So, now it's just us." "Yes," the warlord replied. He walked slowly to the far side of the chamber, hands clasped behind his back, his posture calm but firm. He did not speak again for a long while, as though he was letting the silence itself test the human. Finally, he turned his head slightly. "Tell me more of this human way of humor, of how you endure." The human blinked. "You really want to know?" "I would not ask if I did not." The human leaned forward slightly, nervous but determined. "Humans survive by connecting. We share food, we share stories, and yes, we share laughter. It's not about pretending danger isn't real. It's about remembering we're still alive even when danger is close. Sometimes a joke is all that keeps us from giving up." The warlord listened without interruption. His face remained unreadable, yet something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of interest too sharp to ignore. "You confuse me," he admitted at last. "You are weak compared to my people. Your bones break easier, your weapons are crude, yet you speak with a strength that should not belong to you. You laugh as if death is only a game." The human shook their head quickly. "Death isn't a game. We know it's real. But if you let it crush you before it comes, then you've already lost." The warlord stopped moving, his eyes fixed on the human. The words lingered in the chamber, heavier than any weapon. For a moment the human thought he might strike them down, but instead he laughed again. It was brief, rough, and unfinished, but it was laughter all the same. "You are either dangerous," the warlord said, his voice lower now, "or you are exactly what I have been searching for." The human frowned in confusion. "Searching for?" The warlord did not answer. He only studied the human with that same unsettling smile, the one that suggested he had already decided something, though he would not say what. The human shifted, realizing the danger was no longer in being killed. The danger was in being kept alive, kept close to a warlord who had found a reason to be curious. And in that silence, with the lock still sealed and the warlord's eyes never leaving them, the human understood a chilling truth. The joke had not ended the conversation. It had started something far more dangerous, something that could reshape the path of both their lives. The human had not seen the sun in many days. The alien ship had no windows, only long halls of steel and shifting lights that seemed to breathe with the ship itself. The air carried a faint metallic taste mixed with something sharper like burned stone. Every step the human took was shadowed by guards, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. Yet things had changed. The guards no longer pushed or threatened. They followed, watching with suspicion, but they no longer looked at the human as prey. Something about the warlord's interest had shifted the balance. Rumors moved through the ship like whispers carried by the ventilation system. Some said the human was a prisoner. Others whispered they were the warlord's chosen. The truth lay somewhere in between, and the human could feel the weight of both. The warlord invited the human to walk beside him that day. He led them through his conquered halls past banners of war and trophies taken from fallen worlds. His armor gleamed under the dim light, his steps steady and heavy while the human tried to keep pace with lighter steps. The silence between them stretched until the warlord finally spoke. "Do these halls frighten you?" he asked, his voice deep, echoing faintly. The human looked at the rows of weapons on the walls, at the skeletal remains of strange beasts displayed like victories. Fear should have taken hold, but instead the human shrugged and said, "It's a little dramatic. You could use some flowers." The guards stiffened at such words. Some even turned their heads, ready to see their leader's anger. But the warlord only gave a small, amused sound halfway between a scoff and a laugh. "Flowers," he repeated, as if the word itself was strange. "Do you think beauty has a place in conquest?" "Of course," the human replied with a nervous smile. "Beauty makes life worth living. Conquest is just noise without it." The warlord slowed his steps, considering. His warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Never had they seen their leader pause at such simple words. He looked down at the human, eyes glimmering faintly, and asked, "You speak boldly in my halls. Do you not fear death?" The human forced a chuckle. "Fear is always there. I just don't let it drive me." That answer seemed to strike something deep within him. He studied the human as though searching for cracks, for weakness behind the smile. Yet what he saw was something he could not name. As they continued walking, the human noticed murals painted along one corridor. They were harsh, filled with battle scenes, alien warriors standing victorious over broken foes. The colors were dark, heavy with pride and dominance. The human stopped in front of one mural and tilted their head. "This one is wrong," the human said quietly. The warlord stepped closer. "Wrong?" "Yes, look at their faces," the human pointed. "They don't look strong. They look empty. Victories without joy are just shadows." Gasps came from the guards. To insult the Empire's art was nearly unforgivable. Yet the warlord did not lash out. Instead, his eyes softened with interest. "Empty, you say?" "Empty," the human repeated firmly. "Because strength without happiness isn't real strength. It's just fear in disguise." For a moment, the corridor was silent except for the low hum of the ship. Then, to everyone's shock, the warlord laughed. Openly, freely. The sound echoed off the walls, rough but alive. His guards looked away, uncomfortable with a side of their leader they had never witnessed. "You're a strange creature," he told the human. "Strange, but refreshing," the human smiled weakly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Days turned into weeks. The warlord continued to keep the human close, not as a prisoner locked away, but as a presence at his side. At meals, he asked questions about human traditions. In meetings, he allowed the human to sit nearby, though the generals sneered at the sight. The human spoke freely, sometimes too freely, but that honesty seemed to amuse the warlord instead of angering him. He asked about laughter, about music, about stories told around fires. He listened as if he had never known such things existed, as though they were treasures more valuable than the weapons in his halls. But not all were pleased. The alien warriors began whispering more loudly now. Some called the human a manipulator, others claimed their leader had grown weak. The human could feel their stares, sharp as knives, every time they walked through the halls. Still, the warlord showed no sign of turning away. One night, as the ship floated silently through space, he spoke to the human in a rare moment of quiet. You challenge me with words no warrior dares speak. You laugh when death stands close. You are not like others. The human swallowed nervously. Maybe that's just what it means to be human. The warlord's eyes stayed on them for a long time. Then, slowly, he said, "Perhaps it is what I have been missing." The words hung in the air like a promise or perhaps a warning. The human could not yet tell which. And though fear still clung to every step, a strange bond was forming, one neither of them had expected. What had begun as a reckless joke had grown into something larger, something that unsettled the warriors, but fascinated the warlord. The human realized then that their presence was no longer about survival alone. It was about influence, and influence in the hands of a human could change more than just one warlord. It could change an empire. The warlord's throne room was always filled with the sound of heavy boots, clattering weapons, and voices raised in strategy. Maps of stars glowed in the air above a wide table, showing enemy fleets and territories marked in sharp red lines. His generals stood around him, their faces stern, their pride unshaken. They spoke only of numbers, firepower, and destruction. The human sat quietly at the edge of the chamber, watching the discussion unfold. They were not supposed to be there. At least the generals believed so. Every glance they threw toward the human was sharp with disapproval. But the warlord had ordered it. The human would sit in on every council, whether the generals liked it or not. One general slammed his fist against the table. "We strike head on. Our ships are stronger. Our enemy will fall by sheer force." Another growled in agreement. "We need no tricks. We crush them as we have crushed all others." The warlord listened in silence, his dark eyes narrowing. He leaned back in his seat, tapping one clawed finger against the armrest. For once he seemed bored by their shouting. His gaze shifted toward the human. The human hesitated but felt the weight of that gaze. Against their better judgment, they spoke. "That's not how we'd do it." The room froze. Dozens of alien eyes turned on them at once, sharp and disbelieving. One general snarled, "This creature dares speak?" The warlord raised a hand, silencing him without a word. His eyes stayed locked on the human. "Go on," the human swallowed. Their voice trembled at first, but they pushed forward. "You're all planning to throw everything you have straight at them. But that only works if the enemy is stupid. If they expect you to attack head-on, they'll set traps and bleed your fleet dry." The generals bristled. "What nonsense is this? We have no need for weakling tricks." "It's not nonsense," the human said firmly now. "Sometimes the smaller force wins because they fight differently. On Earth we used surprise, confusion, even fake retreats. We made enemies believe they were winning, until they weren't." The room erupted in scoffs and growls. But the warlord did not stop the human. Instead, he leaned forward, his sharp gaze curious. "And how would you fight this battle?" The human's mind raced. The map of stars glowed in the air, enemy fleets waiting like sharks. Carefully, they pointed to one section. "Here. If you make it look like you're retreating, they'll chase you. They'll think you're afraid. But if you hide ships here, waiting in the dark, they'll be caught between your forces. Surrounded, helpless." The chamber fell silent. The general sneered, unwilling to accept the words of an outsider, but they could not ignore the logic. The warlord studied the map, his expression unreadable. Slowly he stood and approached the human. "You speak of deception," he said. The human nodded. "Yes, deception saves lives. A clever victory is better than a bloody one." The warlord's eyes gleamed faintly. "Your kind fights with shadows and laughter." "Not with brute force," the human met his gaze. "Sometimes brains beat muscles." For the first time, the warlord smiled openly in the council chamber. It was not cruel, but it was sharp enough to unsettle every general present. He turned back to them and spoke with authority. "We will test this human's idea." Dismissed. The generals bowed stiffly, their jaws tight, their pride wounded. They left in silence, though their glares toward the human promised resentment. When the chamber was empty, only the warlord and the human remained. He walked closer, his armor glinting under the pale lights. "Do you know what you have done?" The human shifted nervously. "Made your generals hate me?" The warlord gave a low laugh. "Yes, and also you have shown me a path I had never considered. You speak as though fear is a tool, not a weakness." "It is," the human said quietly. "Fear keeps us alive, but it doesn't have to control us. Sometimes we use it to trick enemies. Sometimes we use it to push ourselves further." The warlord studied the human for a long time, his eyes thoughtful. You remind me that strength is not only in the blade. Perhaps I have been blind. The human offered a small smile. Maybe. Or maybe you just needed someone to remind you. For a moment, the air between them softened. There was no command, no threat, only understanding. It was strange, almost unsettling, but it carried a weight the human could not ignore. The warlord finally turned away, his voice steady but quieter than before. You are fragile, yet you carry ideas that could break empires. That is why you live. That is why I keep you. The human let out a shaky breath. They had not been killed for speaking out. Instead, their words had taken root in the mind of the most feared warlord in the galaxy. And that realization was both terrifying and powerful. From that day forward, the human was no longer just a prisoner or curiosity. They were something far more dangerous. A voice that could shape the future of an empire built on silence and fear. Whispers grew stronger with each passing day. In the halls of the warlord's ship, among the soldiers and commanders, rumors spread like fire. Some said the human had bewitched their leader. Others said the warlord had lost his edge, distracted by a fragile outsider who dared laugh at death. The human could feel the tension in every stare and every hushed conversation that stopped when they entered a room. The warlord himself seemed unchanged, at least outwardly. He continued to lead with the same sharp voice and unshaken authority, but he no longer kept the human hidden in chambers or at the edges of meetings. Instead, he brought them closer, seated them at his side during councils, and even asked for their opinion in front of generals. This only fueled more anger. To the warriors of the fleet, it was an insult. To the human, it was a dangerous spotlight. One evening, as the ship drifted through silent space, the human found themselves walking alone down a narrow corridor. The hum of machines filled the air, but footsteps behind them broke the steady rhythm. When they turned, 2 alien soldiers blocked the path. Their armor was dark, their expressions sharper than blades. "You are poison," one of them hissed. His voice carried through the translator device the human wore. "Our leader is not the same since you arrived." The human's mouth went dry. "I'm not trying to change him." "You already have," the second soldier growled. His hand moved to the hilt of his weapon. A warlord does not laugh. A warlord does not bend. But now he listens to you. You are making him weak. The human's heart pounded. There was no escape in the narrow corridor. Fear pressed against their chest, but they forced their lips into a smile. "If I'm so weak, why are you both afraid of me?" The soldiers froze, caught off guard by the words. Their eyes narrowed, but their weapons stayed at their sides. Before they could respond, a heavy voice echoed from behind them. "Enough." The warlord's shadow filled the corridor. His presence was like a storm breaking over still waters. The 2 soldiers dropped to their knees immediately, their heads bowed. "Forgive us, my lord," one stammered. "We only meant to protect your strength." The warlord's eyes burned like fire. "You question my strength by threatening what I protect." His voice was low, dangerous. "That is treason." The soldiers trembled, but the human quickly stepped forward. "Wait, they didn't hurt me." Their voice shook, but they forced it steady. "They're just afraid. Afraid of losing the leader they've always known." The warlord turned his gaze to the human. His expression softened, if only slightly. Then he looked back at his soldiers. "Leave, but remember this, and fear is not loyalty. If you act again without my command, you will not walk these halls." The soldiers bowed and hurried away, leaving the corridor heavy with silence. The human let out a shaky breath. "You didn't have to defend me like that." The warlord stepped closer, his armor gleaming faintly in the low light. "I did, they must understand. You are not to be touched." The human's voice was quiet. "Why? I'm not one of your people." "To them, I don't belong here." The warlord studied them for a long moment. "You belong because I say you do, and because you see what they cannot." The human frowned slightly. "You mean, because I speak when no one else dares?" He gave a slow nod. "Yes, they follow orders. They fear me. But you," his eyes glimmered faintly, "you challenge me. You tell me truths I would not hear otherwise. That is why you are dangerous. That is why you are valuable." The human wasn't sure how to respond. Part of them wanted to deny it, to remind him they were only trying to survive. But deep inside, they knew he was right. Their presence had changed something. He no longer ruled with silence alone. He was beginning to see the cracks in his own empire. Later, in the great hall, the warlord stood before his warriors. The human was there too, seated at his side. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. anger simmering beneath their discipline. The warlord raised a hand and the hall fell silent. "You question me," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "You think I grow weak because I laugh, because I listen, because I keep this human at my side?" No one answered, but the silence spoke loudly enough. The warlord's eyes swept over them all. Strength is not silence alone. Strength is not fear alone. Strength is seeing power where others see weakness. This human is not weakness. They are proof that power takes many forms. And if you cannot understand that, then you do not understand me. The hall stayed silent, but no one dared speak against him. The human sat still, their heart racing. They had not expected him to defend them so openly, to stake his authority on their presence. Later, when the hall was empty, the human turned to him. "You risked a lot saying that." The warlord's voice was calm. "An empire that cannot face truth will fall. If they see weakness in you, it is only because they fear what they cannot understand." The human's lips curved into a small smile. "You sound almost human." He gave a low laugh, rare and rough. "Perhaps. Or perhaps humanity has more to teach than I believed." The human realized then that the bond between them had grown into something neither had planned. They were no longer just a captive. They were becoming a partner, not in chains but in trust. Days passed, and the tension across the warlord's fleet only grew heavier. The human could feel it in the way soldiers avoided their gaze, in the way conversations stopped when they entered a room. The warlord's public defense had silenced the bravest dissenters, but silence did not erase anger. It only buried it deeper. The warlord, however, remained steady. He continued to involve the human in his councils, asking questions about choices that no one else dared question. The human, unsure of how much influence they truly held, spoke with honesty. They never pretended to be a strategist or a commander. Instead, they asked simple questions. Why fight here? What is the cost? What do your people gain? Those questions cut deeper than weapons, and sometimes even the warlord himself paused in thought. One night, the human stood on the observation deck alone. The stars stretched endlessly across the darkness, entire galaxies like sparks in a vast ocean. They wondered how far from Earth they had traveled, how much time had passed since they were taken. Would Earth even remember them? Or were they only a lost name in some forgotten record? The warlord appeared behind them, silent as always. The reflection of the stars glowed faintly across his armor. "You are restless," he said. The human sighed. "I'm thinking about home, about how far it is, about whether I'll ever see it again." For a long moment, the warlord said nothing. Then he stepped closer. "Home is not always where you were born. Sometimes it is where you are needed." The human turned toward him. "And where am I needed?" "Here, in the middle of a fleet that resents me." His eyes did not waver. "Here at my side." The human laughed softly, though it was without humor. "That sounds like a sentence, not a choice." But the warlord shook his head. "You mistake it. I do not chain you here. You remain because you choose to." The human fell quiet at that. They thought of the corridor, the soldiers who had nearly attacked them, the whispers of betrayal. And yet they had not tried to escape. Somewhere inside they realized he was right. They stayed because they wanted to understand him, because they saw something in him that no one else seemed to see. Their moment of quiet was broken the next day when the fleet intercepted a distress signal. A smaller vessel crippled and drifting. The warlord ordered it to be brought aboard, and soon survivors were escorted into the halls of the ship. They were not enemies. They were refugees, a mix of alien species who had fled from another empire's destruction. The human watched as the warlord's soldiers treated the newcomers with suspicion, almost hostility. To them, weakness was shameful, and refugees represented only failure. But the human stepped forward, offering water, guiding the injured, speaking calmly through their translator device. For the first time, the refugees looked relieved. The warlord observed this with a strange expression, half hidden but not fully concealed. Later, in private, he asked, "Why show kindness to those who cannot repay you?" The human answered simply, "Because if no one shows them kindness, then what is the point of strength? Strength should protect, not only destroy." The warlord considered this. His people had always believed that mercy was weakness, yet here stood someone fragile, unarmed, and still teaching him lessons he could not ignore. That night, in the Great Hall, arguments erupted. Commanders insisted refugees be left behind, that they would slow the fleet and drain resources. Voices rose, sharp and accusing. For a moment it seemed the hall might collapse into chaos. Then the human stood. The entire chamber turned silent, all eyes fixed on them. Fear gripped their chest, but they pushed through it. If you leave them behind, you are no better than the empire that destroyed them. Is that the strength you want to be remembered for? Cruel strength? Empty strength? A heavy silence followed. The commanders shifted uncomfortably, but no one answered. The warlord rose then, his voice filling the hall. We will shelter them, not because they are strong, but because we are strong enough to bear it. Shock rippled through the chamber, but no one dared defy him openly. When the hall emptied, the human turned to him. You listened. He gave a low nod. I did more than listen. I believed. For the first time, the human felt a strange warmth in their chest. This was not just survival anymore. They were changing something larger than themselves. But deep inside, they also knew the cost. Every decision that brought compassion into his rule also widened the rift between him and his warriors. Loyalty held for now, but cracks were forming in the walls of his empire. Cracks that could shatter under the wrong pressure. The human stood at the warlord's side, watching the stars drift outside the ship's glass walls. They could not tell if the future held freedom, ruin, or something entirely new. But they knew one truth. They were no longer just a captive. They were a part of his story, and he was a part of theirs. The battle came without warning. Enemy fleets, long waiting on the outskirts of the galaxy, struck suddenly, their ships cutting through the darkness like knives. Explosions lit the void as lasers and missiles danced in deadly arcs. Alarms screamed across the warlord's ship, and the human's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. The warlord's commanders shouted orders, demanding a full frontal assault. His people, trained to dominate with sheer force, were ready to throw everything into the fight without hesitation. The human watched them, seeing the deadly pride in their movements, and knew disaster would follow if no plan changed. They stepped forward, voice loud enough for the warlord to hear. Wait. Don't attack straight away. Let me show you a way they cannot expect. The generals froze. One of them barked, This human dares give orders? The warlord raised a hand, silencing the chamber. His eyes, dark and sharp, focused on the human. Speak. The human quickly explained a tactic humans once used in desperate wars. A feigned retreat to draw the enemy in, then a hidden force waiting in ambush to strike decisively. They pointed to the fleet positions on the glowing star map, highlighting weak points and channels that would funnel the enemy exactly where they wanted. The generals' faces twisted with disbelief. This is madness, one shouted. It is too risky. The human met their gaze firmly. It is risky. But if we do nothing, we will bleed our fleet dry. Trust me, this will work if you follow it carefully. The warlord studied the map, silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he made his decision. We will follow it. Every move will be executed as the human says. The room erupted with protests, but he silenced them with a single raised hand. His voice carried the weight of command. Do not doubt this decision. The human speaks for reason, not for fear. As the fleet moved into position, the human worked alongside the warlord, directing ships, calculating distances, predicting enemy reactions. They had never commanded ships before, but their human logic, their unpredictable perspective, turned out to be exactly what the battle required. The enemy fleet, confident in their superior numbers, pursued the warlord's fleet, believing them to be in retreat. They fell perfectly into the trap. Hidden squadrons struck from unexpected angles, cutting off escape routes and surrounding the enemy ships. Chaos reigned among the attackers, and panic spread through their ranks. The warlord watched it unfold, with rare satisfaction, his eyes following every calculated move. When the last of the enemy ships were cornered, the human turned toward him. It's done, they said quietly, exhaustion and relief mixing in their voice. The warlord nodded slowly, a low rumble escaping him that sounded almost like laughter. It is done because of your mind, not because of my strength. That is remarkable. Shock and awe spread among his commanders. The human, once the outsider, the captive, had proven their worth beyond anyone's expectation. The warlords' respect for them became evident not only in words but in every glance, every decision that followed. Later, in the quiet of the observation deck, the human stared at the stars, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. The warlord approached, silent as always. "You did not hesitate," he said, "even when the risk was greatest." The humans shook their head. "I was scared, terrified, but you listened, and that made it possible. Without you trusting me, this wouldn't have worked." The warlord's gaze softened slightly. "Perhaps. But it is not only trust. It is understanding. You see things differently than any I have known. That is why you are valuable." The human smiled faintly. "I suppose we both learned something from each other." "Indeed," he said. "You reminded me that strength is not only in weapons or fleets. It is in ideas, in courage, in persistence." The human's heart beat fast. For the first time, they realized they had become more than a survivor, more than a prisoner. They had become a partner, a voice that shaped the outcome of an empire. Months passed. Peace slowly returned, though the echoes of the battle lingered in the halls. The warlord's empire began to shift, subtly but surely. Generals who had opposed the humans' ideas grudgingly began to recognize their worth. Other species, hearing of humanity's unusual strength, curiosity, and cunning, started to regard humans differently. They were no longer fragile outsiders. They were unpredictable, clever, and capable of changing outcomes with nothing more than thought and courage. The human often walked beside the warlord in silence, sharing observations, asking questions, and occasionally making the occasional joke. Each time the warlord would smile, rare and genuine, his armor and reputation softened by this human presence. When asked by his own people why he kept the human close, the warlord would say simply, "They see what others cannot. That is power." And when the human reflected on the journey from captive to partner, they thought of their first foolish joke, the one that had seemed like a mistake, but had changed everything. A joke had opened a door. Courage had walked through it. And together, they had reshaped the fate of an empire. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck, but the human no longer felt small or lost. They had found a place where they mattered, where their voice could alter destinies, and where their humanity, humor, courage, and insight had become the spark that even a feared warlord could not ignore. In the quiet, they whispered to themselves with a smile, "I only made a joke." The warlord, standing silently beside them, replied, not with words but with understanding, a rare and unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes the smallest spark can ignite a galaxy.